Fellow content creator iDentity recently posted a build video centered around what Agent Kelso seems to be running in-game. In that video, he made this interesting comment.
Deal, right? But when you look at the chess piece talent, right? Spotter. This amplifies your total weapon and skill damage by 15% to pulsed enemies. Now when you see the word amplifies, I've been doing my research on this, and when you look at flatline, this also says it amplifies your weapon damage by 15% to pulsed enemies. So it's a question in my head that always lingers around. Is this redundant? If there are two amplifying bonuses, like on Spotter, amplifies total weapon damage, and then you have a talent like Flatline that amplifies your total weapon damage, what weapon damage are you amplifying if you're amplifying both? So it seems like it cancels itself out to me. I don't know, maybe you could help me out with that in the comment section below, which is why I have Optimus.
Let's explain this for him and anyone else who is confused. Once again, this is how damage works in the Division 2.
Hey agents, it's Dispatch. Welcome to the channel where we talk about the math, builds, lore, and game design of Tom Clancy's The Division 2. Let's get stuck into it.
My first voiced video on YouTube actually centered around this very question, but more so about DPS than damage, and being a bit hyperbolic instead of trying to make things as simple as possible. So let's break things down for all our friends out there who are still in the dark on this subject. iDentity is one of many Division 2 content creators who plays a bit fast and loose with the facts and goes more off of feel than anything else when developing his builds. But man, I wish I had a voice as smooth as his. First, we'll talk about how the game calculates damage for each bullet you fire in-game. Then we'll discuss how this will help us do a bit of analysis. We'll have some examples to help you understand along the way. If you have any questions, jot them down in the comments section. I'll respond to them as soon as I can. Here is the damage equation. It's much more simple than it looks. I've tried to be as accurate as possible without getting too mathy with it. In the past, I've talked about average bullet damage, but that's not reflected anywhere on your screen in-game. Average bullet damage and by extension average DPS allows you to account for things like crit chance, your own accuracy, your own headshot percentage, the uptime of your talents, etc. This is the next level of analysis above what we need to discuss first, which is simply the damage numbers you'll see in-game. In-game, accuracy, crits, headshots, armor, and health are all binaries. The bullet either crits or it doesn't. The hit is either a headshot or it's not. The bullet hits armor or it hits health, etc. There's a special case where the bullet will hit armor and then the remaining damage will hit health, but that's a rare case. These discrete damage values are something that drove the development of the Blake tool, which simulates actual damage values against actual targets to help you with your build analysis. Check out the video in the description for an explanation of that tool. But anyway, I've digressed long enough. Let's look at the damage equation. The damage equation is actually very simple. It's basically a bunch of different multipliers multiplied by the base damage of the weapon. The base damage of the weapon you can see in your stat sheet by toggling show base damage. This value never changes. Keep in mind, since the damage equation is almost all multiplication, any of these multipliers can be swapped around and the end result is still the same. This is called the commutative property of multiplication. Basically, 5 times 4 times 3 is the same as 3 times 5 times 4. The answer for both is 60. I only say this because this is an easy red flag to see that a Division 2 content creator doesn't really understand this equation. They'll say things like, since amplifiers are at the end of the damage equation, that's what makes them have the biggest impact. No, that's not true. We just put it there for convenience. If we put a particular variable first, that makes no difference to the end result. The only troubles and complications with the damage equation are finding out which multiplier each bonus belongs to. Each multiplier is a variable affected by the stats on our build. Bonuses of the same name are summed, aka they're added together, and then turned into a multiplier. Bonuses that often have multiple sources, so therefore are commonly added together, are often called additive bonuses. Bonuses that are often by themselves, usually due to only having one source or few sources, that they could add to are often called multiplicative bonuses. We'll see several examples of these. The translation from a bonus value to a multiplier is the same across the board. The percentage value of the bonus is divided by 100 and then 1 is added. So if you have 25% amplified damage, for example, you divide that by 100, so it becomes 0.25. Then you add 1, so it becomes 1.25. So putting 25% amp damage on our build is the same as multiplying our damage by 1.25. Let's step through each category of bonuses. We have the weapon damage multiplier, crit and headshot multiplier, total weapon damage multiplier, out of cover multiplier, health multiplier, armor multiplier, and finally our amplified damage multipliers. Each of these are only present in the equation if the talent or condition is active. For example, the out of cover multiplier will not exist in the equation if the enemy is in cover. Weapon damage includes weapon damage core attributes, specific weapon damage like Sokolov for SMGs, Fenris for ARs, etc., and anything else that just says weapon damage. Now this is a place where the devs fail hardest and where most agents get stuck dealing with the damage equation. Total weapon damage from things like obliterate does not go into the weapon damage bonus. See, it has its own multiplier over here. In addition, certain talents that simply say weapon damage are actually amplifiers. So what's an amplifier? An amplified damage bonus is a bonus that isn't added to anything else. It's the dev's shorthand way to say, hey, this is its own independent multiplier. Rather than coming up with a new name and category for every amplified talent, they just say it's amplified, so it's independent. Spotter and Flatline will always give you 15% each in their own multiplier when they're active. So when Spotter is active, our damage is 15% or 1.15 what it would be if it isn't active. If Flatline is also active, the two will multiply. So 1.15 times 1.15, which equals 1.3225. So if both of these talents are active, the damage is 32.25% or 1.3225 times what it would be if they were both inactive. And we can see here the power of amplifiers and multiplicative bonuses. If these two bonuses were adding together, we would only get a 15% plus 15% or 30% instead of 32%. So to answer iDentity's central question, this is what damage amplification means. So when you have multiple amplified damage sources on a build, you need to make sure those are included in your damage equation to make sure you get accurate numbers. Each one gets its own amplifier that you need to include. The maximum you can have for solo play is usually around 4. A chest talent like Glass Canyon, a backpack talent like Versatile, a gear set talent like Striker, and a weapon talent like Flatline. You could, in theory, get more with group buffs or things like the Striker Shield. Anyway, now let's talk about the inaccurate descriptions that the devs have given us that confuse things. The weapon talents of Ignited, Sadist, Thunderstrike, and Eyeless all say weapon damage, but are actually amplified damage. Striker and Heartbreaker are also amplified damage, even though they at least at one point read as total weapon damage. Circling back to total weapon damage talents have very few sources. Basically, it can come exclusively from gear sets, chests, and backpack talents. Therefore, if you only have one source, it is acting like an amplifier or a multiplicative bonus. Same with damage to targets out of cover and damage to armor, since they almost always only have one source on our build, which is why they are often also referred to as multiplicative. So let's circle back to the crit and headshot multiplier. Your damage bonuses are all added together, as you can see in your stat screen. Same goes for headshot damage. If you happen to hit a headshot that isn't a crit, your damage will be multiplied by that multiplier. Do your translation that we talked about earlier. Same thing with a crit that isn't a headshot. With crits, this will of course be determined by RNG, determined by your crit chance, whether or not a particular bullet is a crit or not. Things get really squirrely, however, when we have a headshot that also happens to crit. In this scenario, our headshot damage bonus and crit damage bonus are added together before being translated into a multiplier. So if we have 100% crit damage and 150% headshot damage, we would add these two together to get 250% damage. Divide by 100, we get 2.5. Add 1 and we get 3.5. So now our damage is multiplied by 3.5 times. Because the bonuses are added together, typically we're not going to go for headshot damage and crit damage. Alright, so that's the damage equation. Let's talk about how we analyze damage on our build from a basic level. Typically we just resolve the bonuses into their multipliers to see which is going to be better. Since each multiplier is independent, we only need to change the multipliers that are affected to see which is better. We don't have to recalculate the whole damage equation each time. For example, let's say we have two damage talents that we're deciding between. Say, glass cannon and perfect glass cannon. Because they're both amplifiers, we only need to look at the values and see that 30% is higher than 25% to see that perfect glass cannon is going to do more damage. Now if we look at glass cannon versus obliterate, things can get more complicated. If there are no other sources of total weapon damage to add to obliterate, then obliterate and glass cannon are both equal at 25% or a multiplier of 1.25. If we are running vigilance, which is also total weapon damage, then we need to resolve both the total weapon damage and amplified damage multipliers in our equation to see which comes out on top. So for obliterate vigilance, 25 plus 25 equals 50% total weapon damage, which resolves into a 1.5 times multiplier. Glass cannon and vigilance have different multipliers, so we need to resolve both of these through translation into 1.25 and 1.25, and then multiply them together to get 1.5625. This is considerably higher. The way I and many others like to analyze damage is to see how much more damage we are going to do with one build over another. And we do this by essentially saying how much more amplified or multiplicative damage would we need to get the same damage. We do this by dividing one by the other. So in the case of vigilance and obliterate versus vigilance and glass cannon, we would do 1.5625 divided by 1.5 to say that glass cannon vigilance is actually doing 4.2% more multiplicative damage. Again, to sum it up for our friend iDentity, when you're amplifying an amplifier, you're just multiplying the two together. Not a big deal. In his video, he weighs Flatline versus Optimist. Optimist is just plain old weapon damage, which he has on his AR, Bender's chest, watch, specialization, and 3 core attributes. For about 95% weapon damage if each of those attributes were maxed out, if I did my quick maths right. So Optimist would be adding with those going from 95% to 125%. If we were to see what the multiplicative difference between these two states is, we would need to resolve these into multipliers, 1.95 and 2.25. Dividing 2.25 by 1.95 equals 1.153, or a 15.3% multiplicative difference. Here we get into a little bit of nuance, however, and most of you probably spotted some of the caveats earlier in this analysis. The damage equation is just telling us the damage at certain states, or with certain talents active at certain values. It does not tell us the uptime of those values. So with Optimist, once we reach the max 30% weapon damage at the end of the mag, we're doing 15.3% more multiplicative damage than at the start. So across the whole mag, we'd be building up to that value. Assuming that the build up is linear, which it isn't but it's pretty close, and assuming that we're hitting all of our bullets through the whole mag, which we won't, our average multiplicative damage increase would be about 7.6%. So our damage is worse with Optimist, right? Well, that actually depends. He'll need to be running the Link Laser Pointer weapon mod to keep the pulse on enemies for Flatline to work, which means removing a 5% critical hit chance weapon mod and compensating elsewhere in his build. What does that mean for our damage equation? It means if we're going to do the calc full justice, we'd also have to resolve our crit damage multiplier to get an accurate comparison. I'm not going to do that today. His build query isn't all that well optimized, and I'd take consistent amp damage from Flatline over Optimist any day. But if he ain't taking it that seriously, neither will I. I just thought this would be a good opportunity to talk about the actual damage equation at its core, just so everyone's on the same page. Once we are all tracking on that, then we can have discussions about uptime, playstyle, difficulty, TTK, DPS, and those more advanced discussions that get really interesting. But that's all I got for y'all today. Remember, don't get intimidated, it's just addition and multiplication. If you have questions, just ask. We literally all have been where you are. With the amount of misinformation from devs and other content creators, we've all been either ignorant or confused. It takes testing and discussions to get this all sorted out. Don't feel like you have to retread the same ground, just ask around. I hope you all learned something, and if you did and love the maths, smash the like. If you didn't, hit the dislike and let me know in the comments what you'd like to see instead. Remember that we got several playlists to suit your taste. Try them all out and see what you enjoy. Next time we'll tackle the philosophies of different content creators and how they compare builds. Let me know if that seems interesting. But until that next time, agents, this has been Dispatch. Take care out there.